Welcome to the monthly vinyl voyage. In September 2022, I started an experiment, building myself a new music collection from scratch at a rate of no more than one album a month. 2 years later, it's formed 24 great albums, and I'm taking some time to look at each one of these purchases, to learn more about it and to reflect on what it means to me, and to digress onto any side notes that I find interesting. Thank you for joining me today. This is my record of the month from March 2023. It was album number 4 in my music collection, and it's Back in Black. Back in Black is the 7th studio album by Australian rock band AC/DC, released 25th of July 1980 by Albert Productions and Atlantic Records. I don't think this is a controversial choice, being perhaps the second best-selling album of all time after Thriller, so a lot of people have got copies of this besides me. This month's episode is a little late coming out because this is the second recording I've done. The first recording ran to over 40 minutes and no one needs that, so hopefully I can keep this version shorter. I never managed to see AC/DC live, and I'm okay with that because I think they are one of the rock bands that managed to capture their live energy in the studio. For me, this is music that I mostly listen to when I'm running. The middle tracks especially are a great tempo, and they allow you to give your run its very own Marvel superhero soundtrack. The record tends to get played when I'm working, especially on the middle stages of a development project where I know what needs to get done and I can just crack on with it. It shares that role with Green Day and Creedence Clearwater depending on my mood. So I started my research for this album by reading from Robert Dimery's 1001 Albums, which says, album cover that can only be described as none more black. Check. Lead singer lost, choked on vomit. Stone Age perspective on sexual politics reflected in the track titles. Yep. You could be forgiven for mistaking AC/DC for Spinal Tap, fulfilling all the requirements for a parody metal act. Where the Aussie rockers swerved the caricature, however, was by producing no-nonsense, enjoyable music that seriously rocked. The only real hint of Spinal Tappery comes at the beginning of Hell's Bells, where the ominous tones of a bell being struck give you the fear that the band are about to embark on their personal Stonehenge, but for the entry of Young's guitars signalling business as usual. Now, there was a fair amount to unpack from that paragraph, and there was a lot of history for me to read up on. I did watch a really great documentary called Blood and Thunder, and I don't want to repeat too much of that, but I think that if we know more of the story, Dimery's criticisms start to look a bit unfair. Conscious of time, but I do want to start with an interesting sidebar, and that's the £10 POM. Now, in 1945, after World War II, the Australian government had a problem. Not enough people to work in their booming industries or for national security. The government decided they wanted to attract white European immigrants, especially from the UK, to maintain cultural and political ties with Britain while aligning with the White Australia policy. Not even going to go there. So they launched the Assisted Passage Migration Scheme, which is better known as the £10 POM, and it ran from 1945 all the way up to 1982, which is in my lifetime, which is mad. Although in the later years they got a lot more selective over who they allowed to use the scheme. Under the terms of the scheme, for £10, British citizens could pack up their lives and start fresh in sunny Australia. Today, that would be about £500 per adult, and kids went free. The government subsidised the rest of the fares and provided support with accommodation and offers of employment on arrival. This deliberately opened the door for a lot of working class families who could never have afforded to make this transition on their own. But there's a catch. You have to stay in Australia for at least 2 years or pay back in full the fare and pay your and your kids' own way home. And that really locked people into their new lives, which was a challenge because when these families arrived in Australia, the reality wasn't quite the idyllic dream that they'd been sold in the ads. Many were housed in temporary accommodation like hostels or Nissan huts, which were like temporary army barracks. Now in 1962-63, the UK experienced the Big Freeze, one of the coldest winters on record. And when you're shivering in sub-zero temperatures for months on end, the idea of warm, sunny Australia becomes very appealing, and the scheme experienced a bit of a boom. And this is where we meet the Young family from Cranhill, a tough post-war scheme in Glasgow. Now Glasgow of the 60s had its coal industry and the shipyards, but it was tough. And after the coldest winter on record, the promise of sunny skies and new opportunities was too enticing. So William and Margaret Young and their 8 children made the life-changing decision to leave behind everything and everyone they knew in the working class streets of Glasgow and set sail for Botany Bay, Australia. Arriving in Sydney, they found their new home was far from the paradise they'd imagined. The Youngs were greeted with 6 weeks of relentless rain, which drummed on the roof of their tin hut and caused the native fauna like snakes to seek refuge in their bedsheets. Despite the initial difficulties, the Young family began to settle into their new life. George Young, the 5th son, quickly found his place in the local music community. He was a talented songwriter and guitarist, but was delighted to meet with fellow immigrant Harry Vanda from Holland, who was an astounding lead guitarist. Joining forces, they started to create music that would soon capture the attention of the world. We should talk about Ted Alberts. In 1961, 25-year-old Ted Albert was promoted to the board of J. Albert & Son Publishing. Ted shared his vision for the publishing dynasty with the other members of the board. He wanted the company to produce records and explore his dream of creating an Australian modern songbook with a sound that was uniquely Australian. It was a bold move, but with the Beatles' debut album selling 1.7 million copies that year, and the booming Australian population, 2/3 of whom were under 20, there was definitely a market. But Ted didn't just want to record the music. He wanted Alberts to nurture young, aspiring musicians. The first band Ted found and championed were the Easybeats, the biggest band that you've never heard of. Believing that the Australian sound would be found with the working class immigrant population, Ted found George Young and Harry Vanda, who'd joined forces with drummer Snowy Fleet and a baby-faced singer called Steve Wright. With Ted Albert's guidance and their own undeniable talent, the Easybeats quickly rose to fame, becoming one of the most popular bands in Australia and experiencing their own form of Beatlemania among the Australian teeny boppers. Ted Albert used that success to secure a deal with United Artists, and the band flew to London to record at Abbey Road. The Australian National News covered the Easybeats leaving the country, but their arrival in the UK went largely unnoticed. London was the global centre for rock and roll at the time, and there was fierce competition from hundreds of other bands. When the band released Friday on My Mind on October 14th, 1966, 63 other singles came out that same day. It took a while to shake out, but Friday on My Mind by the Easybeats became the biggest song for the band, topping the charts in Australia and making waves internationally. But music was changing fast, and the band members found themselves pulled in different creative directions. The straightforward rock and roll style of the Easybeats was solid, but the industry was filled with bands who were now experimenting with complex arrangements and innovative sounds. They released more songs in a variety of styles, chasing the sound of the times, but none ever quite landed as hits, and in 1969 the Easybeats disbanded. Having nurtured the Easybeats to international fame, only to see them lose their way, Ted Albert was ready to support the next generation of talents. and in 1973 Harry Vanda and George Young returned to Australia to become the staff producers for Albert Productions. Reunited with their mentor, they were given the latest technology and the freedom to write and produce songs that they saw fit. And what Harry and George wanted to capture was the raw guitar sounds they heard in the grotty, sticky pubs of the suburbs. The pubs were filled with audiences who were broke and drunk, seeking an escape from their daily struggles. They weren't looking for cheery tunes or witty lyrics. They were there to be excited by the sheer noise and energy of the music. It was time for AC/DC. From a young age, Malcolm and Angus Young had shown remarkable musical talent, and their older brother George had always boasted that they were the better guitarists than anyone. Their older sister Margaret had come up with a name for AC/DC from a sign on the front of the family sewing machine. Angus was still in school and used to record and gig playing lead guitar in his school uniform. In their first year, AC/DC went through 2 drummers, 3 bass players and 3 managers, but they began to settle after the addition of Bon Scott. The pub crowds went berserk for Bon's crass and rude performances, and it was clear he was a perfect fit for the band. With Bon Scott on board, AC/DC began to capture the raw pub energy in the studio. George and Harry brought the band into the studio straight from their gigs to record them. The boys were bursting with raw energy and talent, and George and Harry were born producers. They had a knack of crafting songs and creating a sound that was rebellious and rocking, based on the novel approach of guitar first. The foundation of the song was laid with the guitars, with the riffs as the backbone of the songs, driving the music forward and giving it a powerful, distinctive edge. The lyrics would come later, and they were kept simple, with a focus on a memorable chorus that you could sing. It was a formula, but it was a solid one, which helped the band develop their signature sound. Out of the studio, AC/DC worked Australia hard, relentlessly touring. They played at any venue that would have them, from town halls to tin sheds, and gradually they built a following. Their success in Australia was undeniable, but they had their sights set on international fame, and in 1976 they made the move to London, confident that they could take on the English market. Ted Albert, just as he had done with the Easybeats a decade before, dug deep to bankroll the campaign. AC/DC again landed in London at a time of change for the musical industry. Punk rock was the new sensation, and critics mocked AC/DC as wallaby rockers. But the lesson of the Easybeats had been to hold their nerve and not change for anyone. AC/DC's brand compass was rock solid in one direction, and they did not deviate by any degree. Again, they played any UK venue that would have them, from small clubs to larger theatres, building their reputation 1 gig at a time. And against the critics, they outlasted the punk scene, with their breakthrough coming in 1977 with the release of Let There Be Rock. As their popularity grew in the UK, AC/DC set their sights on conquering the American market. They embarked on their first tour of America in a station wagon, playing an exhausting 200 shows, often performing 2 gigs a night. Back home, Ted Albert wired cash to keep the band afloat, despite pressure from his CFO, who was concerned about the lack of any profit after 5 years. But this was never just business. Ted Albert's role was far beyond that of a typical business manager. He had an unwavering conviction in the people he supported, and often acted as a father figure to the bands under his wing. The Alberts artists were a family. In 1978, this support paid off, as they opened for Aerosmith at the Day on the Green Festival in Oakland, and got noticed by Atlantic Records' new president, who wanted to get AC/DC straight onto American radio. Recorded by Atlantic Records and produced by Mutt Lange, Highway to Hell was released in 1979, and it received critical acclaim and became a commercial success. It reached platinum status in the US, and despite its cleaner production, it still contains their same Australian pub rock sound at its heart. On February 19th, 1980, as the band worked on what would become the Back in Black album, Bon Scott was found dead in a parked car in South London. He'd been left in the car by a friend to sober up after a day's drinking, but he never woke up. Bon loved the whole Alberts family, and he used to call it his family. It was a devastating loss. Malcolm and Angus were unsure if they could continue without Bon. Atlantic Records pushed hard for the band to keep going, but Ted Albert told the boys that he would support them whatever they decided to do. At Bon's funeral, his father encouraged Malcolm and Angus to find a new singer and carry on. With his determination to honour Bon's legacy, they auditioned a number of possible vocalists, trying to find someone who could complete their sound without copying Bon Scott's style. Brian Johnson was the only choice, and after he was broken in during rehearsals in London, the band travelled to the Bahamas to record Back in Black at Compass Point Studios with producer Mutt Lange. The recording sessions were intense and plagued with power cuts from regular tropical storms, and this influenced the opening lyrics of the album. The album features riffs and guitar work that Malcolm and Angus were developing when Bon Scott was still alive. Bon had written lyrics for some of the album, but they decided not to use them, as they felt it would be like cashing in on his death. Instead, Brian Johnson wrote fresh lyrics, giving the songs a second life. This decision not only honoured Bon's memory, but it also marked a new beginning for the band. In 5 weeks, AC/DC had the whole album in the can, and it was the first song recorded which set the tone. It starts with bells ringing for Bon Scott, with the title tracks Back in Black and Have a Drink on Me playing further tribute. Apart from that brief opening, there are no reflective or mournful or sad songs. In general, the band stuck with what they knew: simple, hard-hitting rock and roll, with the formula of guitar first, lyrics second. Songs like You Shook Me All Night Long have an infectious chorus that suit the massive arenas they would eventually fill. And Shoot to Thrill is an adrenaline-filled rock anthem that would be used on film soundtracks for years after its release. Back in Black is a commercial triumph, selling millions of copies worldwide and solidifying AC/DC's place as one of the biggest rock and roll bands on earth. The success of Back in Black was the ultimate triumph for Ted Albert, who'd focused his life's work on building a musical family around the people he believed in. Ted Albert's dreams had started with the Easy Beats, and 15 years later, AC/DC and the Australian sound of the suburbs now ruled the world. Now we know the story, I want to revisit the points and criticisms in that short summary from Robert Dimery's 1001 albums. Lead singer lost, album cover that can only be described as black, and a real hint of Spinal Tappery that comes from the ominous tones of the bell being struck, as well as these simple and Stone Age lyrics. Firstly, the album cover. It's black. The band wanted the cover to be entirely black, with embossed lettering as a sombre tribute to Bon Scott, which would have looked gorgeous. Atlantic Records opposed the idea, fearing it wouldn't catch consumers' eyes, and it was modified and compromised to include a subtle grey outline around the AC/DC logo. They needn't have worried. Back in Black became one of the best-selling records of all times. The band wanted a bell to ring at the start of the album, again in memory of Bon Scott. They had a clear vision and set out to record the sound of a real church bell. However, this proved to be more challenging than expected. The bell they wanted was located in a church belfry, and every time they rang it, the local birds went crazy, creating too much background noise and making it impossible to get a clean recording. Determined to achieve the perfect sound for Bon, the band commissioned a custom bell from John Taylor Bell Foundries in Loughborough, UK, one of the oldest bell foundries in the world. The bell was a massive bronze creation weighing over a ton, and the band wanted an even bigger bell tuned to C, but they had to compromise on a smaller one tuned to E. The pitch on the bell in the record is actually an octave lower than the real bell, and they achieved this by slowing down the recording to make it sound much larger. But rather than being an expensive white elephant, this bell became a staple of AC/DC's live performances. Brian Johnson would come out and hit it with mini sledgehammers provided by the foundry. It cost around £6,000 to produce, which was a significant investment at the time. However, it became an iconic part of AC/DC's image and sound, making it well worth the expense. I mean, are the lyrics and titles on Back in Black simple and caveman-like? Yes, but are you somewhat missing the point of their music? The lyrics are designed to be memorable and singable, coming second to the powerful guitar riffs that define their sound. They're not trying to be clever. AC/DC's commitment to their pub rock formula means that their songs have a consistent, recognisable style that sets them apart from other bands. This unwavering dedication to their roots is the very definition of authenticity and genuineness. And their music resonates with fans because they stay true to who they are, delivering their raw, unfiltered rock and roll. Back in Black isn't just an album that's a good listen. It's a defining moment in AC/DC's history, marking the band's choice between oblivion and wild success. It's the culmination of years of relentless effort and gigging, their hand-to-hand combat as they called it, winning over fans one venue at a time. Yet it's also a fresh start for the band, rising from the shadow of Bon Scott's passing and debuting Brian Johnson's new style. And Back in Black is a tribute unlike any other. It's not many people for whom it would be a suitable tribute, but it's exactly what Bon Scott would have wanted. Massive success for his band after years of effort, which secures the legacy for his family, the Alberts. There are a lot of pressings of this record, and I have a modern one. It's not particularly notable as an object. I have the vinyl reissue and remaster for Europe, pressed in 2009. It's in a standard sleeve with an embossed front. There's not a lot we need to talk about in terms of cover art. One interesting thing is that the track listing on the back is not in play order, and I haven't really found any explanation for this, although there are other albums out there that do this too. Back in Black by AC/DC is a monumental achievement in rock history. Despite selling so many records, he didn't actually reach number 1 in the US. On its initial release, it only reached number 4, but it did reach number 1 in the UK, in Australia, and in France. It sold an estimated 50 million copies worldwide, making it debatably the second best-selling album of all time globally. It's been certified 27 times platinum in the US and is the third best-selling album in the US. It's ranked number 77 on the Rolling Stones list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, and it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2013. What's to love? All of the tracks on this album bat well above their weight. One of the standout tracks is Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, and this serves as a one-fingered salute to the band's culture critics. The song was added late to the album, partly because the record label insisted on more variety in the pacing of the tracks. They didn't want the album to have all the songs at the same tempo. But despite its slower, bluesy feel, the track manages to rock just as hard as the rest, thanks to the Young's guitars, giving no quarter on this album. It's hard to say if there's anything missing. It would feel wrong to put anything from Bon Scott's era onto this record. One of their great triumphs is that all AC/DC albums, old or new, sound like AC/DC. Perhaps the catchiest of all their riffs and hooks is Thunderstruck. I guess that would be my bonus track on this. As one of the best-selling albums of all time, it probably doesn't need me to defend its credentials. But I wanted to share the story and to try and convey that Back in Black is not from a parody metal act. The choices made for this album are deeply thought out. To leave Bon Scott the legacy they wanted, the album needed to be successful and break America. But they also wanted it to be a tribute without being mournful. It needed to be their authentic pub rock sound and, without imitation, incorporate the distinctive style of their new lead singer. It's unapologetically rough, loud and authentic, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm sure I've made mistakes in my research and presentation, but thank you for listening.